Thank you very much for being here. I've been asked to speak on a topic with regards to disinformation and misinformation and how it actually makes it difficult for people to make informed decisions. I was also asked to then share on how communications professionals or aspiring professionals like yourself can deal with this information and disinformation, especially in how it affects businesses and society. Right. So I'll just start by going a bit more details. Before that, let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Justin. I'm currently the honorary treasurer for the Institute of Public Relations of Singapore. This is actually a organization or society in which we give ourselves the mission of helping to elevate the standards of public relations in Singapore. So we do things like training, and we also do things like professional advocacy, right? That's my part-time job. Uh, for me, my full-time job, I'm currently a director of corporate communications in A-STAR, and A-STAR stands for Agency for Science, Technology and Research. So most people don't realize that A-STAR is actually a statutory board under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And our main mission is actually to bring foreign direct investments to Singapore so as to create jobs for Singaporeans. Prior to this, I spent about 4 years in this outfit called the Communications Group. And my primary role in this outfit, which was part of the Prime Minister's office, was to help the government deal with misinformation and disinformation. Okay, our primary mandate was actually to maintain trust and confidence in the government. Okay, and of course, you can see on screen the rest of it. Basically, I started doing all this sort of communications work when I was in the army. That was in 2001, and I've been doing this for close to 20 years. So that's a bit of background about myself. So when you talk about misinformation and disinformation, I think one thing that I want to share with you is that generally this is not something new. Okay, misinformation and disinformation has been going on for decades or centuries, so to speak. Right? You go back to Sun Tzu's time in 5th century BC. That was roughly when Sun Tzu spoke about misinformation and disinformation, and it has been something that governments, militaries, and even organizations have been doing for many years. Okay. In fact, all of us, yourself, myself included, all of us have been doing misinformation and disinformation to a certain extent. So if, for example, I share with you, if you send a WhatsApp message from a friend, okay, instantly you see a message, someone sends you something about maybe something about your lecturer or fellow student. You see the message, you find it interesting, and you share it, right? And subsequently, the information that's being shared turns out to be false. Okay, you have then technically committed an act of misinformation. Right? Similarly, right, for disinformation, a lot of times all of us like to gossip. Right? If you hear certain news about, once again, similarly a lecturer or another student, right, you hear that, and then you then subsequently start gossiping among your friends. Hey, I heard this about Mr. So and so. I heard this about Jane, Tom, or Harry, whoever it is, right? And then as you start to gossip, you start to add on more and more things to make it sound more exciting, right? If you've done that, then definitely you've also committed disinformation. So I would like to say that actually, generally speaking, the fact about misinformation, disinformation is not something new. It is something that many of us actually practice among ourselves, knowingly or unknowingly. Then the question you ask is, what's the big deal, or what's different now, right? If you look at this, right, I would say the main issue about misinformation and disinformation in today's day and age is the scale. Okay, the scale and the impact of disinformation and misinformation. So in the past, I would say that you look at newspapers, right? To actually own and set up a newspaper, it costs you millions of dollars. It costs you millions to set up the printing press. It costs you millions to hire the staff, the journalists, the writers to actually write the stories. It costs you millions to actually set up a distribution center, how to sell your newspapers. It also costs you millions to distribute the newspapers to get it out there, right? Similarly, for broadcast journalism, to own a TV station, to set a TV station, to maintain a TV station costs you tens of millions of dollars, perhaps much more than a newspaper. So in the past, all this ability to communicate widely was taken on by corporations. Okay, and because it's run by corporations, they were there to make money. There are certain regulatory frameworks that came in place. they had to hire journalists. Journalists had to follow strict code of conduct, right? And the governments, of course, ensured that only the right people could own newspapers and broadcast stations. So there were these sorts of checks and balances. But what has changed now? If you look on the screen on the right, okay, social media has actually changed. Nowadays, excuse me, any one of us, right, with a simple handphone, with a data plan, with some certain apps on our phone and social media accounts, each one of us can have a significant reach to actually spread misinformation and disinformation. So it is not new, but what has changed fundamentally is the ability for people, the ability for individuals, okay, and the ability of groups to go out there and to actually spread misinformation and disinformation to cause real harm. I'm sure all of you know the newspaper, right? Over the years, the newspaper has been trying to so-called reinvent itself. For those of you who are not as young as me, you'll realize that the newspaper was tended to be a tabloid newspaper. So it was one of those that had all the juicy details about stories, about sex scandals, about murders, about crimes, right? All those affairs between this journalist, that journalist, this celebrity, that celebrity. So the newspaper used to feature and used to always tell these sort of stories. Okay, if you can make a guess, right? Do you know what is the reach of the newspaper? Right? If you don't have a guess, and if you can key into your chat, it'll be good. Okay, see whether you have a sense. If not, then I will share with you. The latest figure I could gather online, okay, the newspaper had an audited reach of 180,000 daily readership daily in 2018. So 2 years ago, the newspaper had a daily readership of 180,000. So newspaper, of course, moved on to actually set up their own social media page. And if you look at the bottom here, this is actually the newspaper's Facebook community page. So combined, you're looking at a daily reach of about maybe 390 plus 184, about 600,000, right? Not very significant, but of course not insignificant. Now, do you all know this person? This person is Xia Xue, right? I think she's quite famous out there among the younger Singaporeans. Okay, so Xia Xue is an individual who has gained, I guess, popularity or notoriety for the stories she shares. Quite similar to the newspaper, right? A bit more tabloid style and things like that. Okay, but look at this. This is Xia Xue's Instagram page. Xia Xue has 600 over 1,000 followers, right? If you look at the bottom, that is her Facebook page. She has close to 400,000 fan base. If you look at her YouTube base, she has another 250,000. So if you combine these two, on the left, you have a established newspaper with maybe a reach of about 600,000. And Xia Xue, an individual, she has a reach of more than 1 million, okay, about 1.2 million. So the balance of power or the ability to influence is no longer determined by money, but it's by the individuals and the type of story she sells or she communicates, right? And she has a following. If you ask me, the stories that Xia Xue shares has more interaction than newspaper, right? Because things that are salacious, things that are controversial, the things that are juicy, right, tends to actually have more interaction than the boring news that happens on a day-to-day basis. So what has fundamentally changed over the years to influence communication is that nowadays, any individual, right, can actually have as significant a reach or impact as an established newspaper. But the big difference is that newspapers are organizations, newspapers are concerned about their reputation, and these newspapers are regulated by the government, and they also have journalists who are bounded by a code of ethics. Right? So generally, if the concept or the story they're telling is not real or is false, they cannot verify it, the journalists will then not publicize it or share it. But on the other hand, someone like Xia Xue, there's nothing stopping her from actually saying something that's false just to generate eyeballs. Right? Because at the end of the day, for her to make money, it's all about eyeballs. So that is one of the significant difference that has impacted society. such that now misinformation and disinformation is a significant problem that all of us face. Now, I also think it's important for us to then look at the difference or the meaning or the definitions of misinformation and disinformation. Right? So if you look at the definition, I mean, there are many out there, but as I Google and search, these are some of the key things or the main definitions that I find the most significant. For misinformation, it's about false information, right? They're both about false information. But in the context of misinformation, it's about something that was not created with the intention to cause harm, right? And not shared with the intention to cause harm. So generally, it's about innocence, right? You receive the message, you know, whether you know it's false or not false, you share it, right, with your friends, your colleagues, your family. But after you find out that actually, hey, the information is false, then we classify it as misinformation because there was no intention. In fact, you thought you were being helpful by sharing the information. This information, on the other hand, is information that is false and deliberately created to cause harm, right? You see a lot of this in society nowadays. Some people will so-called take something out of context. They will then go and post certain things that people think, create things to just generate interest or conversations, right? So that just to get people to stir an emotion in people. So this is to me the dangers of, what happened? The dangers of disinformation. Now, I would like to just share with you this thing about how I would classify information. Right? You can do this by breaking it up into a vertical, horizontal of what we call true and false news, and horizontal dimension of what I would call bad and good intent. Right? And this is then the center is then where you share the information. Okay. So generally, if you share, I would say true information with good intention, I would classify it as sharing news, right? So this is quite common. A lot of times you have information out there, you see interesting, and you share. If the article comes from the Straits Times or comes from maybe the newspaper or the Business Times, generally it should be true because the journalist wrote the article, the journalist did the fact checking, and then you receive it and then you share it with your friends. Okay, so this is to me is where you share it becomes what I call news. Now, let's say for example, you receive information which you don't really know is true or false, then you then go and share it with intention to actually help someone else. Right? So maybe sometimes you receive information perhaps about maybe a good deal out there, right? Maybe this particular company is having a particular sale. You have the information, you think it's good to share with your family and friends, you share the information. But then subsequently what happens? Actually, the information was false. The company was not having the sale, right? Or the company was actually having the sale, but the sale was actually happened 2 months ago, but you received the information late. So this to me is you had false information, but you had good intentions. And in this context, I will classify it as misinformation. What about this case? False information with bad intention. I think this is very clear, right? There's actually disinformation. You knew upfront, you created it, and then you deliberately go and share this information out there because you wanted to cause certain harm. Well, sometimes, for example, we're unhappy with maybe our peers, our colleagues, or maybe a particular organization. I think it's not beyond some people to go and write fake articles or fake news or fake complaints and then deliberately share among their friends with the intention to actually cause reputational harm to organization. This to me is the context called disinformation. Right? And the last quadrant that I'll talk about is what we call fake news. Fake news is actually true information, true news shared with bad intention. You might be asking me how can it be bad, right? I said I share true information, but my intention is bad. Okay, so this is a very classic example, right? I don't want to talk about the local context, but let's talk about Donald Trump, right? Trump's the U.S. Many of us will look at what he's saying, and we know outright that he's talking rubbish. He's not making sense. He's making things up. Okay, but why do people believe him? Right? Because people choose to believe him. But if you look at Trump is actually a master at the art of doing this. He will find a particular context. He'll find a particular comment that someone said. He'll take that particular comment out of context. Right? It's true, the person said this, but the context in which it was said, the meaning behind what was said is left out. he will then take this particular fact, which is true, and he'll use it to actually spread with bad intentions to cause some harm to his political opponent or to American society as a whole. So in general, if you ask me, you can break up news and information and of course intentions into these four quadrants. And this should give you a good sense of basically what is news, fake news, misinformation, and disinformation. Now, the question that also been asked to answer is why is misinformation dangerous, right? If you look at this on the right, there are three things I want to share with you that makes misinformation dangerous. So in my previous job with the government, we were always very concerned about misinformation. Yes, true. False information that's spread, right? You can say, oh, after a while, people realize it's fake, people realize it's false, people will forget it. But what I want to share with you is this thing called the sleeper effect. This sleeper effect is actually is based on psychology, and it was actually developed or based on a study done during the Second World War, where some scientists did a study about the effects of propaganda. Okay. So generally, when you receive information and you know it's false or you know it's propaganda, or rather you know it's coming from someone who's not credible, you will straight away discount the message. So if someone who's uncredible or is not credible tells you something about ABC, you at the point of the receiving the information, you will discredit it to you. Oh, this guy is talking has an axe to grind. He's therefore making up stories about so and so. So you ignore what was said when it first started. But what happens according to psychology, right? Over time, there's a difference in how information in your memory is stored and how information in your memory is forgotten. According to the sleeper effect, okay, the rate in which you forget who said it is much faster than the rate of the information that you actually receive. So what this means is that if I had said something to you about ABCD, you knew I was not credible, you will ignore it. But after time, as time progresses, you'll forget who said it, but you still remember the message that was said. Right? So this is the danger of the sleeper effect, and why our government as a whole is very concerned about the misinformation being spread. Because if, for example, something negative is said by the government at this point of time by someone whom we know is out to so-called slander or so-called disrupt the government, right? You forget about it now, you discredit it now. But over time, you forget that it was said by this person. And what negative thing was said will still stay in your mind, and it will affect trust and confidence in the government. So this first thing why if misinformation is very dangerous, and we always need to be sure to counter it as quickly and as aggressively as you can. The second reason that misinformation is dangerous is what we call circular sourcing or circular reporting. Okay. This is a relatively new phenomenon that happens I would say, because of social media. Circular sourcing or circular reporting happens when, for example, a particular information is seeded online, right? By certain, I would say, maybe it can be dubious news sources or credible news sources, whatever it is. It first gets online. It can even start by a credible influencer who says something that's negative. What happens? When this person says it online, then the mainstream media picks it up, mainstream media reports it. Right? After mainstream media reports it, some other people online also pick it up and they report it. Then when more people online talk about it, more mainstream media talk about it, and then they keep going around and around and around. Eventually, the fact that this misinformation or this information was false in the first instance is forgotten. And the fact that different credible sources and more sources talk about it gives it credibility, and people forget there's misinformation. In this context, misinformation then becomes a false truth. Okay, you just need to think back to this thing called the anti-vax movement. Right? The anti-vaccination movement was started by a simple study done by the Mormons. You know, the Mormons is a group of people, of believers in Christ, who actually believe that they need to, I guess, answer to a higher God. Right? So they were against vaccination. So there was apparently an article that was written, a study was written and published in the Mormon text. Someone actually reported it online. The mainstream media picked it up, reported it online. More social media outlets picked it up, and they went round and round and round. So now, if you look at the US, apparently, right, this particular fake news or misinformation has resulted in close to, I think, 300,000 deaths because many parents are forcing or refusing to have their children vaccinated because they believe that it causes harm. So this is the second reason why misinformation is dangerous, right? If the source is not so-called challenged, the source is not corrected, and people are allowed to actually report it, then it becomes a self-reinforcing loop, and this misinformation can become very dangerous. The third thing why misinformation is dangerous is because of what I would term the viral effect. When something goes online and something goes viral, right, even if it's false, even if you correct it, there is no way you can correct it 100%. So let's say, for example, something negative goes out, okay, it goes viral. It reaches, let's say, 1 million people. Eventually, it's proven to be fake. You're forced to actually make correction. If because the correction is not as juicy as the initial fake news, then the correction will not go out to the same 1 million people. Right? Just think about it. You are willing to share information that you think is juicy with your friends. Would you be willing to share information to say, oh, sorry, I was wrong. The previous information I shared was not true. The likelihood of you doing that is very slim, right? So this is the third reason why misinformation is very dangerous. If misinformation is allowed to spread and go viral and not corrected quickly, the harm would have been done already, right? And there's nothing else the government or the individual or the organization can do. So it's for these three reasons why I will share with you that misinformation is very dangerous, and we should all be actively looking out on how we can protect ourselves against it. Now, the third thing I was asked to talk about was actually what can communicators do to actually to protect themselves from misinformation and disinformation. There are three things I think we need to do, and I'll share them with you. Firstly, is by actively defending your credibility. Right? So if you look at this chart here I have, right, same thing, I've also done a 2x2 matrix, 4 quadrants. On the vertical axis, I talked about the probability of the news being believed, and the horizontal axis about impact on your reputation. So generally, if something is certain news about your organization or about yourself, right, and it comes online, you can roughly classify it under these four quadrants. If, for example, something is said about you or your organization, and if you think about it and you assess there's a high probability that it will be believed, and if it is believed, there'll be high impact on your organization's reputation, then what I would advocate that you do is to take direct refutation. Go out there, strongly correct the mistake, right? Whether it is through a social media campaign, through a newspaper ad, demanding the person actually make a retraction. This is important because people will believe it if they hear it, and it will affect your reputation. The second thing you must look at, if there's a high probability that it's being believed, but there's low impact on your reputation, then my suggestion is not to go directly refute it. Because if you go and directly refute it, you add more fuel to the fire, more people will hear about it, and then the sleeper effect might come into play. So what then do you do? My suggestion is what you do is called indirect refutation. So instead of getting criticizing the person directly, saying that his person is wrong, getting the person to apologize, then my suggestion is then you actually get some third party to go and contradict what the person has said about you. So he indirectly refutes what was said about you. Okay. The bottom right quadrant, low probability of being believed, but if it's believed, there's high impact on reputation. This is what we call inoculation, right? To inoculate against the information. So what you do is similar to what they do for injection, right? Prior to the information being received by your target audience, you then inundate and you spread information that counters the negative news that people are saying. So if, for example, your organization that people are saying that you have bad service or you're rude to your customers, how do you inoculate? You keep spreading positive news that you have great service, but you have won many awards and that you have many positive comments from your customers. What the intention or the hope is that if I am a customer, I hear that you have good service, I hear that there are many positive reviews, you won many awards. Subsequently, if I hear a negative news about you, about your service, I will tend to discredit the news I hear because beforehand, I've already heard positive things about you. And the fourth quadrant is low probability and low impact. To me, just remain silent. Right? If people are not going to believe it, and even they believe it, there's little or no impact on you, there's no point talking about it. Okay. So the first thing as communicators we can do to help ourselves against misinformation is to actually defend ourselves using this simple 4x4 quadrant. The second thing that you must do as communicator is to establish a single source of truth. Okay. People must know where to go if they want to know information about you. Right? So for example, using the Singapore example, so there are a lot of misinformation going around about the government. So what the government has done, the government has established this website called factually.sg. This website is run by MCI, and every misinformation that is circulated out there, the government deliberately posts the truth or what they say is the truth on this particular website. So this is technically the single source of truth. Right? The government hopes that if there's any information that people are talking about Singapore, talking about the government, and they are not sure about it, they can then go to this website to clarify what's being said. So as a business, if you're running a company, if you're working for an organization, where is this single source of truth? Can it be your corporate communications department? Can it be a portal? Can it be a chatbot on your website? Right? It's important to have that particular single source of truth. Having said that, when you say you have a single source of truth, right, it's important that you protect your credibility at all costs. When I say this, what I mean by saying this is that you should never lie. As a communicator, your credibility is important. The moment you are being caught in a lie, the moment you are seen to be less than truthful, all credibility that you establish is lost. And subsequently, whatever you say thereafter will be tainted. And you can never re-establish that credibility again. Right? So it's important that you focus on having a single source of truth and protecting and maintaining your credibility. The third thing that you should do, right, I would say as a communicator, is to build social capital. Build up your reputation, right? So it's like a bank. If people believe that your company or your organization you work for is very credible, very good, very responsible, if they hear negative things about you, they will slowly chip away or draw down from the capital you have gained. Right? So as long as you keep building your social capital, negative things are said about you, okay, people can still give you some leeway and you can still maintain your reputation. So as a communicator, building your reputation, building social capital is something that you must actively do prior to a crisis. You cannot do this when a crisis has happened. You must be proactive in doing this. Okay. So if you ask me, this is my advice to communicators out there. If you want to so-called fight misinformation and disinformation, these are three things that you must do. Now, some people have asked me, right? If you, for example, how do you know as an individual what is true? Right? I believe in 2013, the National Library Board embarked on this process or this framework that they talk about. It's called the SURE framework. So this SURE framework comes back down to digital literacy. Right? And what it actually says is that whenever you receive information, be it from a friend, be it online, be it from a source that you're not sure about, ask yourself, what is the source? Look at its origin. Is it trustworthy? Right? Make an assessment first. Okay? Of course, if you find that it's not trustworthy, then okay, fine. You can probably discredit it or ignore it. If you find it's trustworthy, fine. Maybe you can believe it even more. Okay. So once you've done that, look at the source. Your next point is then to understand the issue. Do some research. I mean, understand what you're reading, right? Search for clarity. Look for facts other than opinions. Facts are important, right? Focus on facts, not opinions. After you understood it, understood the issue, understood what's being asked or what's being communicated, do some research. Dig deeper, go beyond initial source, investigate thoroughly, and then try to draw some conclusions. Compare different sources, compare different information, okay? Do the research. And then finally, you evaluate and then decide for yourself whether or not you want to believe it's true. This is very important because there's many misinformation. There are many information out there, and there's a lot of misinformation. The only way we can combat misinformation at the individual level, if all of us bear this in mind and be a bit more skeptical about things we read, right? The danger I always tell people is this: if something is shared by your friend, right, chances are the credibility or the trust you have in your friend to share with you the truth is a given. But unfortunately, your friend might be spreading misinformation. Right? So if you blindly follow what your friend is saying, blindly assume what your friend is saying is true, and you subsequently share the information subsequently, that's where the cycle of misinformation becomes very dangerous. Right?